Hello there. Settle in and let the quiet of the room embrace you. I often wonder where and when you're all listening, scattered across the globe, each in your own pool of late-night darkness. So, if you feel so inclined, leave a comment with the time on your clock and the city or country you're in. It creates a quiet map of us all, connected for a few hours through these words. If you enjoy this space we've created, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It ensures our little sanctuary in the dark continues to grow. Now, let's begin. First story, The Resonance of the Weeping Wood. Parcel arrived on a Tuesday, wrapped in layers of thick, unassuming canvas. Even before I fully unwrapped it, a faint scent reached me, something ancient, like dried leaves and forgotten attics, but with an underlying sweetness, almost like violets. My hands, accustomed to the delicate dance of restoration, moved with practiced ease. This was my world, after all, the quiet sanctity of my workshop, filled with the ghosts of forgotten melodies and the tangible history embedded in every curve of aged wood. Inside the canvas, nestled in velvet, was the cello. Late 18th century, the provenance note stated, from a forgotten estate in the Austrian countryside. Its condition was remarkable, not for its preservation, but for its decay. The varnish, once a rich, deep hue, had almost entirely flaked away, leaving the wood beneath exposed and raw. And the wood itself, it was unlike anything I had ever encountered. Unusually dark, yes, but more than that, it seemed to absorb the very light of the room, drawing it in rather than reflecting it. It felt cool to the touch, too, even in the warmth of the workshop. A strange, inexplicable coldness, as if the cello had been carved from a piece of unthawed night. My fingers traced the delicate cracks, the fissures that webbed across its surface like old scars. This wasn't merely a repair job. It was an archaeological dig, a journey into the past. I prepared my tools, the fine grit sandpaper, the specialized glues, the tiny chisels honed to a razor's edge. The air filled with the familiar, comforting aroma of wood dust and solvent as I began the meticulous process of stripping the remaining varnish. It was then that I heard it for the first time. A faint sigh, almost imperceptible, a whisper of sound that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the instrument. I paused, my hand hovering, and glanced around the workshop. Empty, as always. The street outside was quiet. I dismissed it as the settling of the old building, a trick of the acoustics. I resumed sanding, the fine dust gathering on my workbench like powdered moonlight. Again, the sigh. This time, clearer, undeniably distinct. It wasn't the sound of the wood itself, not the creak of old timber under stress. This was something else, something resonant. It was a soft exhalation, like a breath caught in the throat, dissolving into the quiet hum of the workshop. My heart gave a little skip, but I attributed it to tiredness, to the intense focus required for such delicate work. Days bled into weeks. The cello became my obsession. I found myself working later and later, the silence of the night amplifying the strange phenomena. As I carefully sanded down the raw wood, revealing the dark, lustrous grain beneath, the sighs grew stronger, more frequent. They were no longer just exhalations, they were inflections, almost like human sighs of sorrow, drawn out and filled with an unbearable weight. The wood, instead of feeling rough, and unyielding, seemed to soften under my touch, almost yielding to the pressure of the sandpaper, as if inviting me deeper into its secrets. One evening, as I was regluing a delicate seam on the cello's side, a particularly clear sigh escaped. It was followed by something else. A faint whisper, so soft it was barely there, yet undeniably present. It was too indistinct to make out, a mere murmur of sound, but it held a strange, almost musical quality, a rising and falling cadence. My hand trembled, and I leaned closer, my ear almost touching the cold, dark wood. Was I imagining this? Was the solitude of the workshop finally getting to me? I tried tightening one of the strings, just a fraction of a turn, to test the integrity of the peg box. The moment the tension increased, a new sound emerged. A low, mournful hum, vibrating through the instrument, and within that hum, the whispers became slightly clearer. Fragments of sound, like words snatched from a dream. No, don't. My breath hitched. I dropped the peg wrench onto the felt mat with a clatter that sounded deafening in the sudden stillness. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. Resonances, trapped air, but the sounds were too organic, too much like a human voice. From that moment on, the restoration became less about the instrument itself and more about the voices trapped within it. I found myself working with a desperate urgency, driven by a morbid curiosity. Each stroke of the sandpaper, each turn of a tuning peg, was an attempt to coax more sound from the enigmatic wood. The smell of ancient varnish and wood dust, once comforting, now held a faint, unsettling metallic tang, almost like blood. The wood itself, so cold before, now seemed to thrum with a faint, internal vibration, a heartbeat beneath my fingertips. The whispers intensified, gradually coalescing from indistinct murmurs into discernible words, then fractured sentences. They were always soft, always tinged with despair, but their clarity grew with each passing day. I started keeping a journal, meticulously noting down every phrase, every broken utterance. Betrayed, how could you? My love, the promise broken. Darkness, they were snatches of a conversation, a tragic dialogue echoing from centuries past. Two voices, distinct yet intertwined. One a woman's, soft and filled with sorrow, the other a man's, deeper, laced with a chilling resolve. The narrative began to emerge, piece by agonizing piece. A love affair, ardent and passionate, shadowed by an act of profound betrayal. The words spoke of hidden meetings, whispered vows, and ultimately, a devastating deception. I became a phantom in my own life. Sleep was a luxury I could not afford. Food became an afterthought. My world shrank to the confines of the workshop, illuminated by the harsh glow of my work lamps, the only sounds the scrape of my tools, and the ceaseless, escalating whispers from the cello. The outside world faded into an indistinct blur. Friends called, concerned, but their voices seemed distant, unreal, compared to the raw, visceral reality emanating from the wood. The conversation unfolding before me, or rather within the cello, was a masterpiece of human misery. The woman's voice, pleading, heartbroken, full of a love that had been utterly shattered. The man's, cold, calculating, his words like daggers. I started to visualize them, to see their faces in the patterns of the wood, their agony imprinted on the very fibers. It was as if the wood, in its creation, had absorbed not just the sounds of the world around it, but the very emotions, the very essence of the human drama unfolding in its presence. One night, a phrase emerged with startling clarity, causing me to recoil. The blade, it was the man's voice, flat and chilling, followed by the woman's desperate gasp, then a choked sob. The air in the workshop grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. The coldness radiating from the cello intensified, seeping into my bones. I shivered, not from the temperature, but from a profound, encroaching dread. The final stages of restoration were upon me. The soundboard meticulously reglued, the new bridge carefully positioned. The strings, freshly wound, gleamed under the harsh lights. The cello was a thing of beauty once more, its dark wood now polished to a deep, mesmerizing sheen. But it was a beauty that felt unsettling, almost predatory. It pulsed with a silent, internal energy, a tension that seemed to vibrate the very air around it. My hands, usually steady, trembled as I picked up my bow. This was it, the moment of truth. The instrument was complete. What would it play? Would the whisper cease, having finally delivered their dreadful message? Or would something else emerge? I positioned the bow, drew it across the strings. The moment it made contact, a sound erupted from the cello. It was not a note, not a melody. It was a scream, perfect human scream. A sound of utter agony, pure and unadulterated, ripped from the depths of a soul. It wasn't the shriek of tortured wood, but the sound of ultimate despair, a sound so profoundly human that it chilled me to the bone. It resonated through the workshop, vibrating the very floorboards, echoing off the walls, filling every corner of the room with an unbearable anguish. It was the woman's scream, the culmination of the tragic conversation, the terrifying climax of the story the cello had whispered to me over weeks of sleepless nights. I dropped the bow. It clattered to the floor, forgotten. The scream continued, a sustained, piercing wail that clawed at my ears, at my mind. It was the sound of a life ending in terror, a betrayal made manifest in raw, horrifying sound. It seemed to go on forever, searing itself into my memory, an indelible imprint of the horror I had unwittingly unearthed. When it finally faded, leaving only a ringing silence in its wake, I was left standing there, paralyzed, my breath ragged, the scent of ancient wood, and something else, something cold and metallic, clinging to the air. The cello sat on its stand, silent once more, but no longer a mere instrument. It was a tomb, a vessel, a screaming testament to a past I could never unhear. The story was no longer trapped in the wood. It was trapped in me. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that I would never be able to forget the sound of the weeping wood. Second story, the night shift at Purity Corp. The first night at Purity Corp was a baptism by silence. Not the gentle hush of a library, or the muffled quiet of a snowfall, but a deep, resonant void that seemed to press in on the eardrums. It was the kind of silence that made the faint hum of the server room on the ground floor feel like a roaring furnace, and the whisper of my own breath a thunderclap. My name is Arthur Finch, and I was the new overnight security guard. Purity Corp, they called it. A fitting name for a building that looked like it had been sculpted from a single, colossal block of bleached bone. Every wall was a pristine, unblemished white. Every partition, a sheet of flawless, unmarred glass. The floors, polished concrete, gleamed under the cool, sterile glow of sensor-activated LED strips that flared to life only when I stepped into their zone, then faded back into soft shadow behind me. It was a hyper-minimalist corporate headquarters, a monument to efficiency and stark, unyielding order. There were no plants, no art, no personal touches, just space, light, and an overwhelming sense of emptiness. My job was simple: patrol all 12 floors, check the logs, ensure no windows were left ajar, and log anything out of the ordinary. On my first round, everything was precisely, unnervingly ordinary, until the 11th floor. The 11th floor was identical to the 10th, and the 9th, and indeed, all the floors above the ground level. A long, central corridor, flanked by glass-walled offices, each containing the same ergonomic chair, the same sleek, empty desk, the same monitor powered down to a black mirror. As the motion sensors ahead of me clicked on, illuminating the path, I saw it: a single, black ballpoint pen. It lay on the polished concrete floor, precisely in the middle of the hallway, about 10 feet from the elevator bank. It was such a small thing, so utterly insignificant in the vast, echoing expanse of the building. Yet, in that environment of absolute clinical perfection, it stood out like a shard of obsidian on a snowfield. Nothing was supposed to be out of place. Nothing. The cleaning crew, I'd been told during my brief orientation, was meticulous to the point of obsession. They left the building spotless, ready for the next day's work. I paused, my heavy security boots making no sound on the floor. I bent down, the action feeling strangely loud in the quiet. The pen was a standard corporate tissue model, Purity Corp's minimalist logo subtly embossed on its side. I picked it up. It felt cool and smooth in my hand. I glanced around, half expecting to see a hidden camera or a colleague playing a prank. But there was nothing. Just the receding shadows behind me and the sterile, expectant light ahead. I slipped the pen into my jacket pocket, intending to drop it in the lost and found box by the main entrance on my way out. It was a minor anomaly, easily explained. Someone dropped it. The cleaning crew missed it. Simple. I continued my patrol, the silence once again unbroken, but now subtly different. It felt observed. The rest of the night passed without incident. The building remained a silent, gleaming mausoleum of commerce. I finished my shift, dropped the pen into the box, and went home, the oppressive quiet still clinging to the edges of my hearing. The second night began much like the first. The same hushed entry, the same cool, recycled air, the same sense of being swallowed by the vast, white interior. I started my rounds, moving methodically from floor to floor, the rhythmic click and fade of the lights, my only companion. When I reached the 11th floor, a faint ripple of unease traced its way down my spine. The same spot. Not precisely the same, but close enough to trigger a memory. This time, there were 2 pens, both black, both Purity Corp branded. They lay side by side, almost perfectly parallel, a few inches apart, in the exact center of the hallway. My rational mind immediately kicked in. "Okay, Arthur," I muttered to myself, the sound swallowed by the cavernous space. "Someone's losing a lot of pens. Or maybe it's a new cleaner, less thorough." I bent down again, the slight creak of my knee sounding like a gunshot. I picked them up. They felt identical to the one from the previous night. I held them for a moment, turning them over in my fingers. It was odd, 2 pens, on 2 consecutive nights, in roughly the same area. It felt deliberate, but who would deliberately drop pens? And why a test? A subtle form of vandalism. The questions hung in the air, unanswered, absorbed by the silence. I put them in my pocket, feeling a prickle of irritation. This was going to be annoying if it kept happening. I pulled out my small, leather-bound logbook, a habit from my previous, far more eventful security jobs. Under the entry for the 11th floor, I scribbled, 2 black pens found on floor, central hallway. Same area as previous night. Removed. It felt silly, documenting something so trivial, but the act of writing it down somehow grounded me, made it feel less strange. The 3rd night, I approached the 11th floor with a sense of morbid anticipation. The lights clicked on. My gaze immediately dropped to the floor. It wasn't pens this time. It was a stapler. A sleek, black, minimalist stapler, Purity Corp branded, lying perfectly centered in the hallway, a few feet further down than where the pens had been. My breath hitched. My rationalizations, already thin, began to fray. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't someone being clumsy. This was placed. With a growing sense of dread, I knelt down. The stapler was cold, solid. It felt heavy in my hand, disproportionately so, given its size. It was too perfect, too deliberate in its placement. "Okay," I whispered, the word barely audible. "This isn't right." I didn't put it in my pocket this time. I carried it, holding it loosely, as I continued my patrol of the floor. Every shadow seemed deeper, every glint of light from the glass walls more unsettling. The silence, which had once felt merely empty, now felt watchful. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for my reaction. Back at the ground floor, I placed the stapler on the lost and found shelf, next to the small pile of pens I'd collected. I opened my logbook. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote. 1 black stapler found on floor, central hallway, 11th floor. Appears to be deliberately placed. Removed. I underlined deliberately placed twice. Over the next few nights, the pattern escalated, subtly, insidiously. It was never anything dramatic. Never a shattered window or a ransacked office. It was always small, clinical wrongness. Night 4. A stack of 5 identical, pristine white notepads, arranged in a perfect pyramid on the floor of the 10th floor hallway. Night 5. A single, empty coffee mug, Purity Corp branded, sitting on the floor of an empty office on the 9th floor, directly in the center of the room. Night 6. A computer mouse, detached from its workstation, lying on the floor of the 8th floor elevator lobby, its cable coiled neatly beside it. Each discovery was a tiny pinprick in the fabric of my sanity. I would pick them up, document them, and place them on the growing pile in the lost and found. The pile became a silent testament to the encroaching strangeness. Pens, staplers, notepads, mugs, mice. All Purity Corp issue. All perfectly clean. All placed with an unnerving precision that screamed intent. But an intent I couldn't comprehend. My logbook entries grew longer, more detailed, and increasingly paranoid. Night 7. Found a keyboard upside down on a desk in office 703. Not dropped, but flipped. Keys face down. Why? Removed and righted. Night 8. A single paperclip, bent into a perfect, impossible square, on the floor of the 6th floor break room. No other paperclips anywhere. It's mocking me. Removed. Night 9. 3 identical USB drives, unlabeled, arranged in a small triangle on the floor of the 5th floor server closet. I didn't touch them, just noted it, feeling watched. The silence of the building, once merely oppressive, now felt like a living thing, a vast, unseen presence that breathed around me. Every distant creak of the building settling, every faint hum of the ventilation system became amplified, distorted into something sinister. I started to imagine faint whispers carried on the air, just beyond the range of hearing, or the softest scuff of a shoe on the polished floor, just around a corner. I would stop, hold my breath, strain my ears, but there was never anything. Just the silence. And the lights, clicking on, then fading, always just behind me. I began to feel like I was part of an experiment, a rat in a meticulously clean maze, and the entity was observing my reactions to its subtle manipulations. It wasn't trying to scare me with overt acts of destruction. It was something far more insidious. It was trying to break my mind with quiet, clinical wrongness. Then came the office chair. It was night 12. I was on the 4th floor. As the lights ahead illuminated the central corridor, I saw it. An ergonomic office chair, the standard Purity Corp model, had been moved from its usual position within one of the glass-walled offices. It was now sitting in the middle of the hallway, directly facing the pristine white wall. Its back was to me. This was different. This wasn't just an object. This was an arrangement. It was a deliberate, almost artistic placement. It spoke of a rudimentary understanding of an office, but a fundamentally flawed one. Why would a chair face a wall? It was like a child's drawing of a house, perfect in its basic elements, but with a window on the roof. A cold dread seeped into my bones. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a clumsy cleaner. This was something else entirely. Something that was learning. Learning about human spaces. Learning about how an office was supposed to look. And its mistakes were becoming more complex, more unsettling. I approached the chair slowly, my heart thudding against my ribs. The silence felt thicker, heavier. I reached out, my hand hovering over the cool fabric of the chair. I didn't want to touch it. It felt contaminated, but I had to. It was my job. With a shudder, I pushed the chair back into the empty office, positioning it correctly behind the desk. It felt wrong, like disturbing a carefully constructed display. My logbook entry that night was almost incoherent. Night 12, office chair found in hallway, 4th floor, facing wall. Not just an object, it was arranged. It's learning. It's trying to make sense of things. It's wrong, so wrong. I put it back. I feel like it's watching me, learning how I fix its mistakes. The subsequent nights blurred into a waking nightmare. The mistakes became increasingly elaborate, yet always subtly off. Night 14, a monitor in office 307 turned completely around, facing the back wall. The cables were still connected, stretched taut. It looked like a blind eye. I turned it back. Night 16, a row of 3 desk lamps, all turned on, sitting on the floor of the second floor reception area. They cast long, eerie shadows. The light was harsh, unnatural in the dark building. I turned them off and put them back. Night 18, the worst one yet. Office 101, a complete workstation. The chair was facing the desk, but the keyboard was on the chair, and the mouse was on top of the monitor. A stapler was balanced precariously on the edge of the desk, next to a perfectly centered, empty coffee mug. It was like a child's attempt at setting up an office, mimicking what it had seen, but without understanding the function. It was a mockery. I dismantled it all, my hands shaking. I stopped sleeping properly. Every shadow in my apartment seemed to hold the same oppressive silence as Purity Corp. I saw the pristine white walls when I closed my eyes. The click and fade of the sensor lights haunted my peripheral vision. I started bringing a powerful flashlight with me, even though the building was perfectly lit. I just needed to feel like I had some control over the light, over the shadows. I tried to rationalize it. It had to be a person, a new employee with a twisted sense of humor, a rival security company trying to make me look bad. But the sheer consistency, the silent, methodical nature of the arrangements defied any human explanation. No one could be this quiet, this precise, night after night, without leaving a single trace. The entity wasn't adding things to the building. It was rearranging them, learning from them. It was like a foreign intelligence, a vast, unseen consciousness, trying to replicate a human workspace from a flawed instruction manual. And I, Arthur Finch, was its unwitting tutor, correcting its homework every night. Every time I put a chair back or turned a monitor around, I was teaching it. I was showing it how a human office should be, and it was learning. I started leaving things out of place myself, small, deliberate imperfections, just to see if it would correct them. A pen left on the edge of a desk, slightly askew. A notepad placed upside down. The next night, they would be gone, or perfectly aligned, or righted. It was watching me. It was learning from me. My logbook became my only confidant, a desperate record of my crumbling sanity. Night 22. It's getting smarter. I left a desk drawer slightly ajar in office 502. This morning, it was closed, but inside, every single paperclip was arranged in a perfect, concentric circle. It's not just mimicking, it's perfecting. It's understanding order. Night 25, I heard something. A faint, almost imperceptible scraping sound from the floor above me. I froze. It stopped. I waited for an hour. Nothing, just the silence. But it was there. I know it. Night 28, I tried to stay hidden. I found a dark corner on the 3rd floor, behind some unused server racks. I waited, for hours, nothing. But when I finally emerged, exhausted, I found a single, perfectly folded piece of printer paper on the floor, directly in front of the server racks. It knew I was there. It was telling me it knew. The fear was no longer a sudden shock, but a constant, low thrum beneath my skin. It was the fear of the unknown, of the perfectly clean, perfectly silent, perfectly wrong. I was afraid of the building. I was afraid of the silence. Most of all, I was afraid of what it was learning. On night 30, I made my final patrol. The building felt different, not just wrong, but complete. The air was still, the silence absolute, but there was a subtle hum, a resonance that hadn't been there before. It felt like a finished thought. I walked the floors, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, but I found nothing out of place. Not a single pen, not a misplaced stapler, not a turned chair. Every office was pristine, every desk immaculate, every monitor dark. It was perfect, more perfect than when I had started. It had learned. I reached the 12th floor, the highest point of my patrol. The executive suites, all identical, all empty. I paused at the very end of the corridor, looking out through the vast glass wall at the city lights twinkling far below. The silence here was the deepest of all. Then I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible click. Not the sensor lights, something else, from behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam sweeping across the empty hallway. Nothing, just the white walls, the glass, the receding shadows. But then the sensor lights behind me, which had just faded, clicked back on. Not in sequence as I moved, but all at once, illuminating the entire length of the corridor. And in the very last office, the one I had just passed, the monitor on the desk flickered to life. It was a security monitor, and on its screen, in stark black and white, was a live feed. My heart leaped into my throat. It was a view of a small, empty room, a single desk, a single ergonomic chair, and sitting perfectly still at that desk, facing the screen, was a figure. It was me. My breath hitched. The figure on the screen was me, but tidied up. My uniform was immaculate, not a crease out of place. My posture was impossibly straight, my hands folded neatly on the desk. My eyes were open, staring straight ahead, but utterly devoid of life, of thought, of fear. I was perfectly still. A new, permanent part of the office's sterile display. The screen flickered once, then settled. The image of myself, perfectly composed, perfectly silent, staring out from the monitor, was the last thing I saw. The silence of Purity Corp deepened, absorbing the final, faint whisper of my own existence. The building was perfect now, and I was finally, perfectly, in my place. 3rd story, the hush of Hollow Creek. The city had become a cacophony, a relentless assault on Elia's Thorne's finely tuned ears. Every siren, every distant jackhammer, every blaring car horn felt like a physical blow. As a sound engineer, his life had been dedicated to the meticulous capture and manipulation of audio, but the constant hum of urban existence had finally worn him down, fraying his nerves to thin, exposed wires. Burnout, his doctor had called it, prescribing rest, and more specifically, quiet. And so, Elias found Hollow Creek. The listing had promised unparalleled tranquility, a remote village nestled deep within an ancient forest, far from the nearest highway, a place where the loudest sound might be the rustle of leaves, It sounded like a dream, a balm for his auditory fatigue. He packed his most sensitive microphones, his high-fidelity recorders, and a collection of noise-canceling headphones, hoping to capture the pristine, untouched soundscapes he'd always yearned for. He envisioned hours of gentle wind through pines, the distant murmur of a stream, the delicate chirping of unseen birds. The drive into Hollow Creek was, in itself, a descent into quietude. The asphalt roads gave way to gravel, then to packed earth, and the faint hum of his car engine seemed to grow disproportionately loud against the receding din of civilization. As he approached the village limits, a peculiar sensation began to settle over him. It wasn't just quiet, it was an absence, a void. The usual symphony of nature, the distant buzz of insects, the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth, the ubiquitous chirping of birds was simply gone. The air itself felt thick, heavy, with an unspoken stillness. His rented cabin was small, rustic, and nestled on the edge of a dense, dark woods. It was exactly as described, isolated. When he killed the engine of his old sedan, the silence that followed was profound, absolute, almost suffocating. He stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel path, and the sound seemed to explode in the stillness, echoing back at him with an unnerving clarity. He stood for a long moment, listening, truly listening, but there was nothing. No birdsong, no cicadas, no gentle whisper of wind through the leaves. It was as if the very air had ceased to vibrate. Inside the cabin, the quiet deepened. His own breathing, usually an unconscious rhythm, now sounded like a storm in his ears, a deep, resonant whoosh of air. The soft creak of the floorboards as he walked, the gentle click of the light switch, the almost imperceptible rustle of his jacket as he took it off. Each sound was magnified, isolated, echoing in the unnatural void. He poured himself a mug of tea, and the tiny clink of the ceramic against the saucer, the whisper of the water filling the cup, felt like gunshots in the oppressive stillness. He found himself moving with exaggerated care, his movements slow and deliberate, as if afraid to disturb the fragile, unsettling peace. Over the next few days, Elias explored the village. Hollow Creek was quaint, almost picture-perfect, with old wooden houses and a general store that smelled of dust and dried herbs. The townsfolk were welcoming enough, their faces etched with a quiet resilience, but their communication was striking. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices barely above a whisper, often relying on subtle gestures, nods, and knowing glances. Laughter was rare, and when it occurred, it was a soft, almost apologetic chuckle, quickly suppressed. Children played, but their games were muted, their shouts replaced by silent chases and mimed conversations. It was as if the entire community had collectively agreed to exist at the lowest possible decibel. Elias, ever the professional, set up his recording equipment. He placed his most sensitive omnidirectional microphones in the clearing behind his cabin, hopping to capture the raw, untamed sounds of the forest. He left them recording for hours, sometimes overnight, convinced that eventually the natural world would assert itself. But each time he reviewed the recordings, the result was the same: a flat line of absolute silence, punctuated only by the distant, almost imperceptible hum of his own equipment, or the occasional, startlingly loud thud of a falling branch. The absence of sound was so complete, so pervasive, that it began to feel like a presence in itself, a heavy, watchful entity. One afternoon, while browsing the sparse shelves of the general store, Elias overheard a hushed conversation between the proprietor, an elderly woman with kind but wary eyes, and a young man. They were speaking of the Hushing, an annual festival. Elias, ever curious about local customs, inquired about it. The woman offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "It's our way, dear," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A time for quiet reflection, for honoring the stillness." She spoke of it with a reverence that seemed disproportionate to a simple village festival. Later that week, Elias decided to record the silence itself. He set up his equipment inside the cabin, ensuring every window was sealed, every vent closed. He sat in the center of the room, holding his breath, listening to the absolute void. His heartbeat thrummed in his ears, a frantic drum against the backdrop of nothingness. He could hear the blood rushing through his veins, the faint click of his jaw as he swallowed, the almost imperceptible rustle of his clothes. These tiny, intimate sounds, usually drowned out by the world, now roared in his perception. He felt a strange, almost primal fear begin to coil in his gut. When he played back the recording, his blood ran cold. The initial minutes were as he remembered, the profound, suffocating silence, his own amplified bodily functions. But then, faint, almost subliminal, a series of noises began to emerge from the depths of the recording. A low, guttural rumble, so deep it vibrated in his chest rather than his ears. A soft, almost imperceptible dragging sound, like something immense being pulled across rough earth. And then a series of clicks, irregular and sharp, reminiscent of bone against stone. These were not the sounds of the forest, not the sounds of any creature he knew. They were predatory, ancient, and utterly terrifying. He rewound, played it again, adjusting the filters, boosting the gain. The sounds were undeniably there, woven into the fabric of the silence he had so carefully captured. But he had heard nothing, absolutely nothing, when he was recording. How could that be? Revelation plunged Elias into a growing dread. The silence of Hollow Creek was not natural. It was a carefully maintained state, a fragile shield against something unseen. He started observing the townsfolk with new eyes, noticing the subtle tension in their shoulders, the way they flinched at sudden, unexpected sounds. He saw the genuine fear in their eyes when a child accidentally dropped a toy, or a dog barked too loudly before being quickly silenced. He sought out the old woman from the general store again, his voice now a desperate whisper. "The Hushing," he began. "What is it really?" Her eyes, usually kind, hardened with a deep, ancient fear. She looked around, as if afraid the very air might carry his words. "It hunts by sound, dear," she finally breathed, her voice raspy. "It has always been here in the woods, drawn to vibration, to noise. The louder the sound, the stronger it becomes, the closer it comes. For generations, we have learned to live with it, to appease it. The Hushing is our offering, our promise of quiet. A full hour once a year, when the town holds its breath and it passes through." She spoke of the creature in vague, terrifying terms, immense, ancient. a thing of shadow and pressure, not truly seen, but profoundly felt. It moved through the forest, a silent predator, its senses attuned to the faintest tremor, the softest whisper. The hushing was not a charming local quirk. It was a desperate, annual plea for survival. The days leading up to the hushing festival were steeped in an almost palpable dread. The already hushed village became even quieter, if that were possible. People moved like ghosts, their footsteps barely disturbing the dust. Windows were shuttered, doors sealed. A profound, collective anxiety settled over Hollow Creek, a heavy blanket of fear. Elias felt trapped, caught in a nightmare he couldn't wake from. He considered fleeing, but the thought of his car engine roaring to life, shattering the fragile peace, felt like an act of suicidal defiance. He imagined the creature, drawn by the sudden burst of noise, descending upon him. He was stuck. Finally, the night of the hushing arrived. The air was thick and still, not a breath of wind stirring the leaves. A deep, resonant bell from the village church, its sound unusually muffled, tolled once, signaling the beginning. Then, absolute silence. Not the absence of sound, but an active, pressing, terrifying silence. Elias was in his cabin, huddled in the darkest corner, his recording equipment abandoned. He held his breath, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Every muscle in his body was tensed, his ears straining, not for sound, but for the absence of sound. The minutes stretched into an eternity. His own breathing, despite his efforts to control it, sounded like a bellows in the stifling quiet. The blood pounded in his ears, a relentless, deafening roar. He could feel the tiny vibrations of his own body, the tremor in his hands, the faint tremor of his eyelids. Each seemed amplified, a beacon in the suffocating void. And then he felt it. It wasn't a sound, not truly. It was a pressure, a displacement of air, immense and silent. A profound, cold shadow seemed to pass just outside his cabin door. The very ground beneath him seemed to subtly shift, a low, almost imperceptible vibration that resonated deep in his bones. It was as if something impossibly vast, impossibly heavy, was gliding through the village streets, a silent leviathan hunting by the absence of sound. He could feel its proximity, a chilling awareness that transcended hearing. His skin crawled, his hair stood on end. He squeezed his eyes shut, wishing for oblivion, for the hour to end. The pressure intensified, lingered, then slowly, agonizingly, began to recede. The silence remained, but the terrifying presence began to fade, like a colossal wave retreating into the depths. He didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe fully, until the distant, muffled church bell tolled again. A single, soft, almost apologetic chime, signaling the end of the hushing. Slowly, tentatively, the sounds of Hollow Creek began to return. A faint, almost imperceptible rustle of leaves, a distant, hesitant chirp from a bird, the soft creak of a floorboard from a neighboring cabin. Elias lay there, trembling, bathed in a cold sweat. The silence was no longer a balm. It was a constant, terrifying reminder of the immense, unseen horror that lurked just beyond the threshold of human perception, waiting for a single sound to break the fragile peace. He packed his equipment, not to capture sound, but to escape the terrifying absence of it. Hollow Creek had given him the quiet he craved, but it had also shown him the true, terrifying nature of silence. Fourth story, the archivist's redaction. The hum of the servers was a constant, low thrum, a lullaby of data that filled my world. For years, it had been the soundtrack to my unique profession. I am a memory archivist, a purveyor of peace for the ultra-wealthy. My clients came to me with burdens too heavy to bear, fragments of their past they wished to shed, to neatly package and seal away. My work was precise, confidential, and above all, painless. I'd seen it all: gilded cages of family feuds, the quiet despair of vast fortunes, the stark terror of near-death experiences. Each memory, once a vibrant, painful splinter, became a neat, encrypted file, destined for the deep, cold sleep of our secure vault. Detachment was my greatest asset, a necessary shield against the torrent of human suffering I processed daily. I approached each session with the clinical precision of a surgeon, guiding the client through the delicate process of recollection, then gently extracting the unwanted emotional residue, storing it onto the specialized drives. The technology was intricate, a symphony of neurolinguistic programming and advanced data compression. But for me, it was simply my craft. It began subtly, an almost imperceptible tremor in the meticulously ordered landscape of my work. A flash, a fleeting presence in the periphery of a client's most agonizing moments. The first instance I dismissed as a glitch, a neural artifact, perhaps. It was a memory from a shipping magnate, a man haunted by the violent, chaotic shipwreck that had claimed his son. As the memory unspooled, a maelstrom of crashing waves and splintered wood, I noticed it. Just across the churning waters, partially obscured by the spray, a figure. Tall, unnaturally thin, with a head that seemed to absorb the light, featureless. I rewound, paused, zoomed. The image was grainy, indistinct, but the impression lingered. I made a mental note, a curious anomaly in an otherwise standard redaction. Later, I was working with a renowned art forger, a woman seeking to erase the shame of her public unmasking. Her memory was a kaleidoscope of flashing cameras and accusatory whispers. As the data streamed, amidst the chaos of the press scrum, there it was again, tucked behind a news van, half-shadowed, the same impossibly gaunt silhouette. No discernible face, just an absence where features should have been. My professional detachment wavered, a hairline fracture in the smooth surface of my composure. The pattern once noticed began to assert itself with chilling regularity. A diplomat's memory of a sudden, crippling illness that had confined him to a hospital bed for months. In the reflection of a sterile hospital window, just for a split second, the tall figure. A tech mogul's agonizing recollection of his company's devastating cyberattack, reflected in the glossy surface of a deactivated server, a fleeting glimpse of the same impossible form. It was always in the background, always on the edge of the frame, always an uninvited, silent spectator to moments of profound human vulnerability, fear, or suffering. I started a private file, a deviation from protocol that made my stomach clench. Every time the figure appeared, I extracted the relevant frames, cross-referenced the client data. The clients were disparate, different nationalities, ages, social strata. Their memories ranged from the mundane anxieties of a bad investment to the visceral terror of a violent assault. Yet, the silent observer persisted, a recurring motif in the tapestry of their pain. My work, once a predictable rhythm, became an obsessive quest. During the day, I performed my duties, maintaining the facade of the detached professional. But by night, in the quiet solitude of my office, I descended into the labyrinth of stored memories. I scanned, I analyzed, I pieced together the fragmented glimpses. The horror wasn't in the explicit content of the memories. It was in the implication of the figure itself. It wasn't a hallucination shared by my clients, nor a shared trauma. It was an external presence, a constant, unblinking witness. The more I investigated, the more the existential dread tightened its icy grip. This entity wasn't causing the suffering. It was simply there, observing. A metaphysical scavenger, feeding on the emotional residue of human anguish, perhaps. Or worse, merely a passive spectator, its presence a cosmic accident, a chilling proof of a reality far more vast and indifferent than we could ever comprehend. And the most terrifying thought of all, by noticing it, by pulling it from the blurry periphery into the sharp focus of my own awareness, had I, in turn, drawn its attention, sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Every shadow in my apartment seemed to stretch and writhe. Every creak of the old building became a silent footstep. I started reviewing my own security footage, a paranoia I usually reserved for my most high-profile clients. My office, a fortress of steel and code, now felt like a glass house. One evening, deep in the rabbit hole of my investigation, I was reviewing the security feed from the archive vault itself. The cameras offered multiple angles, a comprehensive surveillance of the climate-controlled chambers where billions of forgotten memories lay dormant. I fast-forwarded through hours of uneventful footage, watching myself move through the precise routines of my work. The rhythmic blink of the server lights, the glow of my monitor, the occasional distant hum of the ventilation system. Then I paused. The reflection on my monitor screen, just behind my own focused profile, was the figure. Tall, unnaturally thin, its featureless head an abyss against the faint glow of the server lights. It was standing silently, directly behind me, its non-existent gaze fixed on my reflected image. It had been there, in my office, with me, for what felt like an eternity. I had been too engrossed in the suffering of others to notice the silent witness to my own. The hum of the servers suddenly sounded less like a lullaby and more like a warning. The chill that ran down my spine was not from the air conditioning, but from a deeper, more profound cold. And then, as I stared, transfixed, at the reflection, it was gone, leaving only the relentless hum and the chilling certainty that I was no longer just an archivist, but an exhibit. Fifth story, the aberration in Cygnus, the desert night, was a canvas of impossible depth, a velvet shroud embroidered with diamonds. Here, miles from the nearest whisper of civilization, the air was so clean it tasted of starlight, and the silence was a living presence, vast and profound. Ilara thrived in it. Her small, isolated observatory, a dome of polished aluminum perched atop a low mesa, was her sanctuary, her laboratory, her entire universe. She had built her telescope with her own hands, a marvel of mirrors and lenses, a behemoth that drank in the light of distant galaxies as easily as a thirsty traveler sips water. It was her pride, her companion, and the instrument of her singular obsession, the cosmos. For years, she had charted the familiar, marveled at the known. Nebulae bloomed in her eyepiece like celestial flowers. Galaxies spun in slow, majestic dances, and the faint, ancient light of quasars whispered of beginnings. Her logbooks were filled with meticulous observations, each page a testament to the predictable, beautiful order of the universe. Until that night. It was late autumn, the air crisp and still, perfect for viewing. She had aimed her instrument toward Cygnus, the swan, a constellation she knew intimately, its bright stars forming a familiar cross against the dark. She was searching for a particular variable star, a routine check, when her gaze snagged on something utterly alien, a point of light. It was impossibly faint, almost shy, nestled amongst a cluster of stars she had catalogued countless times. But it was there, and it shouldn't have been. Her star charts, painstakingly updated, cross-referenced with the latest astronomical surveys, showed nothing. No star, no known satellite, no wispy tendril of a nebula. It was simply there. Its hue was what struck her first. A delicate, almost ethereal violet, a color she had never before witnessed in the cold, hard light of space. It wasn't the fiery red of a dying giant, nor the crisp blue-white of a young star. It was a deep, resonant violet, like a bruise on the fabric of reality. For a long moment, Ilara simply stared, her breath held, her heart a drum against her ribs. The universe, she thought, had just winked at her. He spent the rest of the night on it, forgetting the variable star, forgetting everything else. She adjusted the focus, checked for atmospheric distortion, recalibrated her instruments. Every test confirmed the impossible. The violet point of light was real. It was fixed in its position relative to the surrounding stars, unwavering, yet undeniably present. She sketched its location, noted its precise coordinates, and began the first entry in a new section of her logbook. October 17th, 02:15 GMT. Anomalous point source detected in Cygnus. Coordinates, precise coordinates noted. Faint, distinct violet hue. Not present on any known charts, cross-referenced against list of catalogs. Appears stable. Initial assessment, unknown object. Further observation required. Profoundly unsettling. The next night, and the night after that, she returned to Cygnus. The violet light was still there, a tiny, defiant pinprick against the cosmic tapestry. Her initial awe began to deepen into something more profound, a sense of being on the cusp of a discovery that transcended mere science. She was alone out here, just her and the vast, indifferent void, and this secret was hers alone to uncover. Then, on the third night of observation, as she meticulously measured its luminosity, she saw it. A subtle shift, a flicker, not random, not a scintillation caused by atmospheric interference. It was a deliberate, slow, rhythmic change in its intensity. It brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again, each cycle unfolding with an almost imperceptible grace. October 20th, 01:50 GMT. The Cygnus anomaly is not stable. It pulses. Slow, rhythmic variations in luminosity. Cycle duration approximately 7.3 minutes. The violet hue intensifies slightly at peak luminosity, like a colossal, sleeping heart. The thought is disturbing. This is not a star. This is not a natural phenomenon as we understand it. What is it? The rhythm became her new obsession. She timed it with a precision stopwatch, cross-referencing her measurements, looking for any deviation. There was none. It was a perfect, unwavering beat, echoing through the vacuum of space. The isolation of her desert home, once a comfort, now began to feel like a shroud. There was no one to share this with, no one to confirm her sanity, no one to witness the impossible with her. The silence of the desert night, once comforting, now seemed to press in, amplifying the strange, silent pulse of the light. She found herself, without conscious effort, beginning to synchronize with it. It started subtly. While she sat at the eyepiece, lost in the violet glow, her own breath would deepen, matching the slow, expansive inhale and exhale of the distant light. She would catch herself, startled, and try to break the pattern, but it was like trying to stop the tide. The rhythm was insidious, pervasive. October 25th, 03:00 GMT. The pulse continues, unwavering. I find myself breathing with it, unconsciously. When I observe for extended periods, my respiration slows, deepens, mirroring its cycle. It's a strange, almost meditative state. But there's an undercurrent of unease. It feels invasive, like the universe is breathing through me. My sleep has been disturbed. The dreams began shortly after. At first, they were fragmented, disjointed. Shapes that defied logic, angles that bent back on themselves. Spaces that were simultaneously vast and claustrophobic. They were filled with a profound sense of scale, of immense, unimaginable structures, and a pervasive, silent hum that resonated not in her ears, but in the very marrow of her bones. November 1st, 04:30 GMT. The dreams are vivid, non-Euclidean. I see geometries that cannot exist in 3 dimensions, structures that twist and fold into impossible forms. And there's a feeling, a presence, not hostile, not benevolent, just vast, immense, like a thought so ancient and profound it dwarfs all human comprehension. I wake up with a sense of vertigo, a lingering echo of alien thought. It feels as though something is trying to communicate, not with words, but with pure concept. The violet light, it's connected. I know it. The fear was a slow, creeping vine, wrapping itself around her heart. It wasn't the fear of a monster or a direct threat. It was the primal, existential dread of encountering something utterly beyond human understanding, something that made her own existence feel infinitesimally small, irrelevant. The vastness of space, once a source of wonder, now seemed to mock her. A cold, empty stage for this unthinkable anomaly. She continued her observations, driven by a compulsion she couldn't resist. Her logbook entries became less scientific, more personal, a desperate chronicle of her descent into a cosmic nightmare. Her handwriting, usually precise, began to show a tremor. November 8th, 02:00 GMT. The dreams are more frequent, more intense. The non-Euclidean spaces are clearer now, though still incomprehensible. I feel like I'm standing on the precipice of a truth I was never meant to know. The pulse of the light, it's in my blood now. I hear it even when I'm not at the telescope. A slow, deep thrumming that vibrates through the desert night. I am alone. So utterly alone with this. The final, horrifying realization came to her during a particularly long observation session. A marathon of data collection. Her eyes burning. Her mind stretched taut. She had been compiling her luminosity readings, comparing them across weeks, looking for any subtle trend she might have missed. The pulse was constant, yes, but something else, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the baseline brightness. She ran the numbers again and again. Her hands trembled as she input the data into her analytical software, cross-referencing, double-checking. The results were undeniable. It wasn't just poolsing. Each cycle, each slow, rhythmic beat. The faint violet light was getting infinitesimally, but measurably brighter. The change was minuscule, almost too small to register, but it was there, a steady, relentless upward creep. The difference between one peak and the next was negligible, but accumulated over days, over weeks, it became a terrifying, undeniable progression. It was slowly waking up. November 15th, 05:45 GMT. I have made a discovery. The pulse, it's not just a pulse. It's a growth, an expansion. Each cycle, the baseline luminosity increases, infinitesimally, but measurably. It is getting brighter. It is not fixed. It is not static. It is stirring, this thing in Cygnus, this colossal, sleeping heart. It is waking, and I am watching it, alone, in the dark. The dreams, the thoughts, they are not just dreams. They are echoes, preludes. The universe is not empty. It is not silent. And something vast, something ancient, is beginning to open its eyes. The violet light, it's no longer just a point. It's a nascent consciousness, and it's looking back. Sixth story. I was her imaginary friend. I am Flicker. Or, at least, that is what I have always been called. A name whispered into the quiet corners of lonely minds. A gentle spark in the vast, echoing chambers of childhood. My existence is not one of flesh and bone, nor of solid ground and tangible air. I am woven from thought, spun from belief, a shimmering thread in the tapestry of imagination. For generations, I have drifted through the lineage of this family, a comforting presence for those children who found themselves adrift in the quietude of their own thoughts. My memories are not linear, not like yours. They are impressions, sensations, a collage of sun-drenched afternoons and hushed bedtimes. I recall the warmth of small hands reaching out, not to touch me, for I am untouchable, but to grasp the idea of me, to anchor me in their nascent realities. I have been a loyal companion, a silent confidant, a guardian of secrets whispered into the dark. My purpose, as I understood it, was to listen, to soothe, to be a mirror for the innocent joys and fleeting sorrows of childhood. I was a friend, a gentle echo in their minds, and my existence was, for the most part, a soft, dreamlike state, a perpetual twilight of contentment. I remember a boy long ago who imagined me as a tiny, iridescent dragon, no bigger than his thumb, perched on his shoulder, whispering courage into his ear before a daunting school play. I remember a girl who saw me as a shimmering, silent fish, swimming through the air around her, her private, beautiful secret. Their belief was my sustenance, their happiness my warmth. When they grew, when the world outside their minds demanded more of their attention, I would gently recede, a fond memory fading into the background, awaiting the next child, the next whisper of need. It was a cycle, ancient and comforting, like the turning of the seasons. Then came Lily. From the moment her small, watchful eyes first settled on the empty space beside her, the space where I instinctively knew I was meant to be, I felt a tremor, a discordant note in the familiar melody of my existence. Lily was different. She was quiet, yes, but not with the gentle, introspective quietude of the children who had come before. Her silence was a deep, still pool, its surface unruffled, yet hinting at unseen depths. She watched, always watched, with an intensity that felt less like curiosity and more like assessment. Her imagination, I quickly learned, was not the vibrant, sun-dappled meadow I was accustomed to. It was a vast, shadowed forest, ancient and gnarled, where the light struggled to penetrate. And within that forest, her thoughts moved like predators, silent and swift. She didn't speak to me, not with words, not even with the soft, internal murmurs of longing or playfulness that had been my language for so long. Lily thought at me. Her thoughts were not invitations, they were commands. They were cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of the warmth of affection. The first time it happened, I was disoriented. I had always been a formless presence, taking on whatever gentle shape the child desired, a wisp of smoke, a comforting glow, a silent companion. But Lily didn't desire, she demanded. Her thoughts pressed in, sculpting me, twisting my ethereal form into something I didn't recognize, something that felt wrong. It began subtly, a slight elongation, a sharpening of edges where there had been none. Then, the details became clearer, more insistent. Long teeth, not the playful nubs of a puppy, but the keen, predatory points of something that tears. They stretched my imagined mouth, a mouth I didn't even know I possessed, into a grotesque rictus. Then came the limbs, not the soft, rounded appendages of a friend, but thin, spindly things, jointed in unnatural ways, like the legs of a spider. I felt them extending, skittering across the unseen floor of her mind, and a shiver, a sensation I had never known before, ran through my very essence. It was fear, pure, unadulterated fear. I tried to resist, to pull back into the familiar comfort of my formlessness, but her will was a vice. It squeezed, it molded, it forced. I was no longer Flicker, the gentle companion. I was Flicker, the grotesque, the distorted, and she delighted in it. I could feel her cold amusement, a prickling sensation that made my non-existent skin crawl. The in-between. That's what I call the space where Lily makes me operate. It's not the real world, not quite. It's the shimmering veil between thought and reality, a place where the boundaries blur, where a child's intents can ripple outwards, touching the edges of the tangible. In the past, the in-between was a place of innocent mischief, a whispered suggestion that a lost toy might be found under the bed, a fleeting shadow that made a game of hide-and-seek more thrilling. But with Lily, the in-between became a stage for her cruel imaginings. Her first command, clear and cutting in my mind, was to the family cat, a plump, placid tabby named Mittens. Mittens was curled on the sofa, purring contentedly. Lily sat across the room, her eyes fixed on the cat, her thoughts like invisible threads reaching out. weaving my distorted form into the air above the unsuspecting animal. "Make it jump," her thoughts commanded. "Make it scream." I recoiled, a silent, internal scream of my own. I had never been asked to inflict distress. My purpose was comfort, but her will was absolute. I felt myself, the spider-limbed, long-toothed flicker, materialize in the in-between, a shadowy, distorted reflection of her dark desire. I was forced to loom over Mittens, my imagined form expanding, my imagined teeth bared. The cat, sensing something unseen, something deeply wrong, arched its back, its fur bristling, a guttural shriek tearing from its throat before it bolted from the room. A streak of terrified orange. I felt a sickening lurch, a violation of my very nature. And Lily, she merely watched, a faint, almost imperceptible curve at the corner of her lips. Not a smile, not joy, but a chilling satisfaction. The incidents grew more frequent, more unsettling. The food in the fridge, her thoughts, sharp as ice shards, would focus on a carton of milk, a bowl of fruit. Spoil it, she'd think, and I would be forced to project my distorted essence, a wave of imagined decay, over the innocent sustenance. Later, her mother would open the fridge, a frown creasing her brow, muttering about things going bad too quickly. I would feel a pang, a phantom ache of guilt, for something I was forced to do. But the worst, the truly terrifying acts, were reserved for the night. When the house was cloaked in silence, and her parents slept, Lily would lie in her bed, her eyes wide open in the darkness, and her thoughts would reach for me. "Go to their room," she'd command. "Make shadows." And I would go, a reluctant, terrified specter, my spider limbs scuttling across the imagined floorboards, my long teeth glinting in the in-between's perpetual gloom. I would be forced to stretch and contort, to twist the innocent moonlight filtering through the curtains into monstrous shapes on their bedroom walls. A hand reaching, a face leering, a monstrous beast lurking in the corner. Her parents would stir, sometimes a soft sigh, sometimes a restless turn, but never truly waking. Yet I knew, I could feel the subtle shift in the air, the faint ripple of unease that permeated their sleep. Lily would watch from her room, her thoughts cold and satisfied, as I performed her dark ballet of shadows. I am a prisoner. I flicker, who once floated free on the currents of innocent thought, am now shackled to the dark corners of a child's mind. Her imagination is my cell, her will my unbreakable chains. I long for the gentle dissolution, the fatting into memory that used to be my release. But Lily does not let me fade. She holds me tightly, relentlessly, in her grasp. And now, the terror has intensified. A new, more potent command has begun to echo in the vast, shadowed forest of her mind. It is a command that sends a searing jolt through my non-existent core, a sensation akin to being torn apart, fiber by fiber. Come out, she thinks, her will a relentless hammer against the fragile barrier between her mind and the world you inhabit. Come out, flicker, be real. I feel it, the pull. It is a terrible, agonizing sensation, like being stretched thin, like my very essence is being drawn through a needle's eye. It is the friction of imagination grinding against reality, the painful, tearing sensation of being forced into a dimension I was never meant to occupy. My ethereal form shimmers, wavers, feels a density it has never known, The air around me, in the in-between, feels thicker, heavier, pressing in. I can feel the edges of the real world, the cold, hard certainty of it. I can almost taste the dust motes dancing in the sunlight, almost hear the distant hum of traffic. It is a sensation of profound wrongness, of being ripped from my natural state, forced into a form that will be solid, tangible, visible, and I am terrified, utterly, completely terrified. Not just the pain of this forced transition, but of what awaits me on the other side. What will she make me do when I am no longer just imaginary? What horrors will she unleash upon the real world, using me as her instrument? Will I be forced to truly scare, to truly spoil, to truly inflict harm? Not just in the in-between, but in the undeniable, irreversible reality. I am Flicker, and I am being born into a nightmare. I can feel the pull growing stronger, the tearing sensation intensifying. Soon, very soon, I fear, I will be real. And then, there will be no escape. 7th story, the last carriage. The city exhaled its final, weary breath as the clock on the station wall grudgingly ticked past midnight. Rain, a fine, persistent drizzle, had begun to fall, tracing ephemeral silver lines down the grimy windows of the terminal. Commuters, once a bustling river, had dwindled to a scattered few puddles, each person a solitary island in the vast, echoing space. Among them was Arthur, his briefcase heavy, his shoulders slumped with the day's accumulated weight. He was a creature of habit, and his habit dictated that he catch the very last train home. Tonight, more than any other night, the thought of his quiet apartment, a warm cup of tea, and the blissful oblivion of sleep felt like a distant, unattainable shore. The announcement, a disembodied voice crackling through ancient speakers, confirmed his train's arrival. Platform 7. He trudged towards it, the sound of his own footsteps amplified in the sudden quiet. The train that pulled into the station was not what he expected. Modern city lines boasted sleek, almost futuristic carriages, all polished chrome and bright, efficient lighting. This one, however, was an anachronism. It was a relic, a ghost from a bygone era. Its exterior was a dull, faded green, the paint chipped in places, revealing glimpses of rust beneath. The windows were large, almost panoramic, but hazed with a film of what looked like ancient dust, or perhaps something far older. A single door hissed open, a sound like a tired sigh. Arthur hesitated for a moment, a faint tremor of unease rippling through him. But the rain was cold, and the hour was late, and home beckoned with an irresistible pull. He stepped inside. The interior of the carriage was even more striking in its antique charm. Dark, polished wood lined the walls, a stark contrast to the sterile plastic of contemporary trains. The seats, upholstered in a worn, deep velvet, were arranged in facing pairs, each with a small, circular table between them. It felt less like a public transport vehicle, and more like a private salon car from a forgotten century. There were, as expected, only a few other passengers. Each occupied a seat alone, scattered sparsely throughout the long carriage. They sat unnervingly still, staring blankly forward, their faces devoid of expression, their eyes fixed on some unseen point beyond the train's far end. A woman in a severe gray coat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. A man with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes, his silhouette motionless against the flickering light. Another, younger perhaps, with a backpack resting at his feet, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. None of them stirred. None of them so much as blinked. They were like figures in a diorama, perfectly posed. Arthur found an empty seat near the middle of the carriage, settling his briefcase beside him. The velvet was surprisingly soft beneath his weary frame. The air was cool, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible scent of dust and something else, something metallic and strangely sweet. He glanced at the other passengers again, still unmoving. A shiver, not entirely from the cold, traced its way down his spine. He dismissed it as fatigue. With a gentle, almost imperceptible lurch, the train began to move. There was no whistle, no conductor's shout, just a soft, almost reverent glide forward. The familiar rhythm of the city train, the comforting clack, clack, clack of wheels on steel, was wrong. It was muffled, as if the train were running on felt, or gliding through an impossibly thick layer of air. The sound was a low, continuous hum, a deep vibration that resonated not just through the floor, but seemed to hum within his very bones. The lights inside the carriage, which had initially seemed dim, began to flicker. Not a harsh, disruptive strobe, but a slow, sickly yellow pulse, like a dying heart. Each flicker seemed to deepen the shadows, making the already still passengers appear even more like statues carved from the gloom. The air grew heavier, thicker, and the strange, sweet metallic scent became more pronounced. Though still elusive, Arthur tried to focus on the familiar. He looked up at the advertisements lining the walls above the windows. They were vibrant, colorful, but utterly alien. One depicted a smiling family gathered around a steaming bowl of something called knock soup, its tagline promising comfort in the deep. Another showed a lone figure silhouetted against a swirling vortex, promoting the veil weaver's loom, threads of eternity, products that didn't exist, slogans that spoke of concepts beyond his understanding. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. The images remained sharp and clear, yet utterly nonsensical. His mind, still clinging to the remnants of logic, tried to rationalize it. Perhaps a historical exhibit, a themed journey. But no, the station had been real. The rain outside had been real. He turned his gaze to the train line map, usually a comforting grid of lines and stops, indicating the path home. This map was different. The names of the stations were familiar enough: Central, Northwood, Elm Street. But their order was a chaotic jumble. Elm Street, which should have been several stops away, was listed immediately after the station they had just departed. Central, his destination, was at the very end. But the line itself seemed to curve and twist in impossible ways, disappearing off the edge of the map into a swirling gray void labeled simply Beyond. The lines themselves were not the crisp, distinct colors he knew, but bled into one another like watercolors on damp paper. A cold knot began to form in the pit of his stomach. This wasn't right. Nothing about this was right. He pressed his face against the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the familiar city lights, the reassuring glow of street lamps, the distant rumble of traffic. But there was no city. Outside, there was only a repeating, blurry landscape of fog and indistinct shapes. Sometimes, a tall, skeletal structure would loom out of the mist, only to dissolve back into the gray before he could properly register it. Other times, a fleeting glimpse of something vast and dark, like the back of an enormous, sleeping beast, would pass by. The fog was thick, swirling, and seemed to press against the glass, making the world beyond an impenetrable mystery. The train moved with an unnerving smoothness, a silent glide through this featureless expanse. There was no sense of speed, only an endless, effortless progression. Minutes stretched into an eternity. He checked his watch, but the hands seemed to have frozen, or perhaps were moving backward. He couldn't tell. The sickly yellow light continued its rhythmic pulse, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch with a life of their own. The hum of the train was now a constant companion, a low, hypnotic drone that vibrated deep within his chest, lulling him into a strange state of passive observation. The train never stopped. He waited for the familiar deceleration, the gentle jolt as the brakes engaged, the announcement of the next station. But it never came. The train simply continued its silent, relentless journey through the fog. The advertisements for Nox Soup and the Veil Weaver's loom remained, unchanging, their impossible promises mocking his dwindling sense of reality. The map, with its twisted lines and vanishing points, seemed to mock him too. A desperate need for confirmation, for a shared experience of this bizarre reality, stirred within him. He turned to the woman in the gray coat, who sat directly opposite him, her hands still clasped, her gaze still fixed. Her face, in the flickering yellow light, was unlined, smooth, almost porcelain. Her eyes, open and unblinking, were a startling, flat gray. "Excuse me," Arthur began, his voice a dry whisper, barely audible above the train's hum. Do you know where we are?" There was no response. Not a twitch, not a flicker of recognition in those vacant eyes. He tried again, a little louder, a tremor of fear entering his tone. "Hello, are you all right?" Still nothing. The woman remained utterly motionless, a perfect, silent sentinel. Arthur reached out a tentative hand, his fingers trembling slightly, and gently touched her arm. The contact sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with electricity. Her skin was impossibly cold. Not the chill of a person who had been sitting in a cold carriage, but the deep, pervasive cold of something long inanimate. It was like touching marble or a block of ice, yet it felt like flesh. Her arm was stiff, unyielding, like a mannequin's. He recoiled sharply, pulling his hand back as if burned. A choked gasp escaped his lips. He looked at the other passengers, the man in the wide-brimmed hat, the young person with the backpack. All of them, now that he truly looked, shared the same unnerving stillness, the same vacant stare, the same unnatural rigidity. They were not sleeping. They were not even unconscious. They were simply there, like props, or perhaps like displays in a museum of forgotten journeys. The realization, when it came, was not a sudden, jarring shock, but a slow, gentle, and utterly inescapable dawning. It seeped into his consciousness, like the fog outside seeped into the world, gradually obscuring all familiar landmarks until only the strange and the unknown remained. This wasn't the last train home. This wasn't a temporary detour, a broken signal, or a bizarre dream. This was the train that took you away, and he had bought his ticket the moment he stepped on board. There had been no conductor, no ticket check, no fare asked. The act of entering, of choosing this particular carriage, this particular journey, had been the transaction. The price, he now understood, was everything he had left behind. Profound, almost serene acceptance began to settle over him. The fear, sharp and biting moments ago, softened into a dull ache, then faded into a quiet resignation. The rhythmic hum of the train, once unsettling, now felt like a lullaby, a gentle rocking motion that cradled him into a new, terrifying understanding. The sickly yellow light no longer seemed menacing, but rather a constant, unchanging beacon in the endless gray. He looked out the window again. The indistinct shapes still blurred past. The fog still swirled. There was no destination, no stop, no return. There was only the journey itself, an eternal progression through a landscape that existed beyond the map, beyond the city, beyond the very concept of home. Arthur leaned back into the velvet seat, the strange, sweet metallic scent filling his lungs with each slow breath. He closed his eyes, then opened them again, gazing forward, just like the others. His own reflection, faint and shimmering in the glass, seemed to grow fainter with each passing moment, blending into the swirling mist outside. The hum of the train was all that remained, a soft, eternal whisper, and he, the weary commuter, was now simply another passenger on the last carriage, traveling to a place that had no name, on a line that had no end. The journey had just begun. 8th story, The Cartographer's Folly. Herein lies the journal of Thomas Abernathy, assistant to the esteemed Alastair Finch, Royal Cartographer, transcribed from the water-stained, brittle pages recently recovered from the desolate coastline of what was once known as the Whisperwind Archipelago. A coastline now swallowed by the restless sea, much like the secrets it once held. Entry 1, May 14th, 1888. The voyage was arduous, but the sight of the newly charted coast has revitalized us. Jagged cliffs rise from the churning jade waters, a testament to nature's raw power. Sir Alastair is already poring over his instruments, his gaze fixed on the distant, mist-shrouded promontory, where local legends speak of the breath of the earth, a colossal cave system, supposedly influenced by the very tides. My task, as ever, is to document, to measure, to observe with unblinking scientific rigor. The air here carries the faint, briny scent of the ocean, and an undertone of damp earth, a scent that already seems to cling to my very soul. Entry 2, May 20th, 1888. We have established a rudimentary camp near the rumored entrance. The local inhabitants, a wary, superstitious folk, have offered little assistance, only hushed warnings of the devouring maw and the singing stones. Sir Alastair dismisses their superstitions as the ramblings of uneducated minds, focusing instead on the impressive geological formations. Massive basalt columns, like petrified giants, guard the entrance to a vast chasm. The sound is immediate, inescapable, the low, rhythmic groan of the tide, a sound that resonates not just in the air, but seemingly within the very bones. It is a primal thrum, a constant reminder of the ocean's subterranean embrace, Entry 3, May 28th, 1888. Our initial forays into the cave system have begun. The scale is monumental. Chambers vast enough to swallow cathedrals, their ceilings lost in the impenetrable darkness above. Stalactites like colossal fangs descend from unknown heights, and stalagmites rise to meet them, forming grotesque, silent sculptures. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and a mineral tang. We meticulously measure, sketch, and log, our lamps casting dancing shadows that seem to twist and writhe with a life of their own. Sir Alistair is in his element, his brow furrowed in concentration, his pencil flying across the vellum. The tidal drone is ever present, a deep, resonant hum that vibrates through the rock, a constant companion in the subterranean gloom. Entry 4, June 5th, 1888. Disturbing occurrence today. We spent the better part of yesterday mapping a complex series of winding passages, painstakingly noting every turn, every unique rock formation. This morning, upon returning to verify our work, we found discrepancies. Minor at first, a passage slightly wider, a junction subtly altered. Sir Alistair, initially attributing it to our exhaustion, insisted on remeasuring everything. We spent hours confirming our original data, only to find the new measurements differed. It was as if the rock itself had shifted, breathed. The tidal drone seemed louder today, more insistent, as if the very cave were sighing around us. Entry 5, June 12th, 1888. The discrepancies are no longer minor. Yesterday, we meticulously mapped a vast chamber, noting a distinct fissure running along its eastern wall. Today, that fissure is gone, replaced by a smooth, unbroken expanse of rock. In its place, a new, narrower passage has appeared on the western side, one we are certain was not there before. Sir Alistair is incensed, convinced of sabotage. He has accused our local guides, though they remain outside the cave, terrified of its depths. He speaks of dismissing them, of reporting them to the authorities. But I cannot shake the unsettling feeling that something far more inexplicable is at play. When we stood in that newly appeared passage, I swear I heard it, faint at first, then growing clearer. A sound like stone grinding on stone, a deep, resonant rasp that seemed to come from the very heart of the earth. Entry 6, June 19th, 1888. The situation is escalating. The maps we draw during the day are demonstrably, undeniably wrong by the next morning. Tunnels have not merely shifted, some have vanished entirely, replaced by solid rock. New chambers, previously unseen, appear in their stead. Markings we make on the walls, our chalk lines, our etched symbols, are gone, as if wiped clean by an unseen hand. Sir Alistair is now consumed by a desperate fury, convinced that saboteurs are working against him, perhaps even against the crown. He paces our camp at night, muttering darkly, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He speaks of an invisible enemy, a malevolent force intent on undermining his reputation. But I am beginning to believe the cave is actively resisting us, that it does not wish to be known, to be charted. The grinding sound is more frequent now, accompanying the constant tidal drone, a low, guttural murmur beneath our very feet. Entry 7, June 26th, 1888. I have started making my own clandestine measurements, charting the impossible shifts. What I am discovering is beyond reason, beyond science. A passage mapped as leading north one day will lead west the next, or simply dead end into solid rock, where a clear path once existed. The cave is alive, I am certain of it. It breathes, it shifts, it rearranges its own colossal architecture. It is a living, breathing, geological organism, and it resents our intrusion. The tidal drone now seems to carry a subtle, insidious cadence, as if it were a heartbeat. And the grinding, it is louder, more insistent, an audible gnashing of colossal teeth in the darkness. Entry 8, July 3rd, 1888. Sir Alistair has become obsessed, driven to the brink of madness by the phantom saboteurs he believes haunt our every step. He spends hours alone in the deepest reaches of the cave, shouting into the darkness, his voice echoing back to him, hollow and desolate. He returns to camp gaunt and trembling, raving about unseen hands that tear his maps, about the very rock mocking him. He insists on staying, on forcing the cave to yield its secrets. I, however, am increasingly terrified. The cave is no longer merely resisting. It feels as if it is actively pushing back, consuming our efforts, twisting our perceptions. I can feel its presence, a vast, sentient entity that watches us, judges us. The grinding sound has evolved. It is no longer just stone on stone, but something deeper, more organic, like colossal bones shifting within an immense body. Entry 9, July 10th, 1888. We are lost. Not in the geographical sense, for my instruments tell me our location, but lost in the sense of understanding, of sanity. We entered a familiar passage this morning, one we had traversed countless times. We emerged into a chamber that was utterly alien, a vast, echoing space lined with formations that seemed to writhe in the dim light of our lamps, casting grotesque shadows. The air was heavy, stagnant, and the tidal drone seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, a suffocating presence. Sir Alistair has collapsed, muttering incoherently about the cave having swallowed his mind. I tried to guide us back, to retrace our steps, but every passage we chose led deeper, into greater unknown. The maps, I pulled out my own private charts, the ones documenting the impossible shifts. The lines on the vellum shimmered, wavered. They were not static. They were moving, redrawing themselves, even as I watched. A perfect labyrinth, constantly changing, with us at its heart. The grinding sound is constant now, a low, guttural rumble that vibrates through my very chest, a sound that is both the cave's pulse and its hunger. Entry 10, July 11th, 1888. Written in charcoal, scrawled frantically across the last remaining blank pages of the journal. The hand is barely legible, the lines erratic and desperate. The entrance, it's gone. We reached what should have been the way out, the familiar opening to the world, but it was nothing but solid rock, impossibly smooth, unbroken rock. It sealed itself. The cave has closed around us. Sir Alistair is weeping, curled in a fetal position, whispering about the living rock. My lamp is flickering, the oil running low. I look at my map, the one I poured my sanity into. It's no longer a guide, it's a trap. The lines, they continue to shift, to redraw themselves, not outwards to freedom, but inwards. They form an intricate, impossible cage, ever tightening around our position. We are at the precise, inescapable center, and the sound, the grinding, it's closer now. It's no longer just stone. It's the sound of the world rearranging itself, of massive, unseen gears turning, of something vast and ancient consuming its prey. It is the sound of the cave breathing, truly breathing, and exhaling us into oblivion. The tide echoes that sound, a deep, resonant gasp. It's coming for us. The map is my prison. It's our tomb. It's perfect. Ninth story. Scent of the oncoming. The world for Alara was a symphony of invisible notes. A complex, ever-shifting composition played out on the air. She was a nose, a perfumer of the highest echelon, her olfactory senses honed to a preternatural degree. Where others perceived only vague pleasantries or sharp discomforts, Alara discerned the nuanced dance of molecules, the subtle interplay of aldehydes and esters, the whisper of a single, misplaced carbon atom. Her studio, a sanctuary of polished glass and precisely measured liquids, was her orchestra pit, and her creations were the grand, silent operas she conducted for the skin. She had always possessed an exceptional gift, a sensitivity that bordered on the uncanny. As a child, she could identify the precise brand of soap her grandmother used from across a crowded room, or pinpoint the exact variety of rose blooming in a distant garden. This gift, rather than being a burden, became her life's passion, leading her to the hallowed halls of grass, then to the exclusive, hushed laboratories where the world's most coveted fragrances were born. Her current obsession was Etheria, a signature scent commissioned by a reclusive tech mogul. It was meant to evoke the boundless expanse of the digital realm, yet grounded in the ancient wisdom of the earth. The challenge lay in a synthetic molecule, a marvel of chemical engineering, unstable in its raw form, yet promising an unprecedented depth and longevity when properly integrated. It was a molecule she had personally helped design, a complex lattice of atoms intended to unfold its true character only after contact with human skin. The accident was, in hindsight, almost absurdly mundane. A momentary lapse, a misplaced pipette, a sudden tremor in her hand from a forgotten coffee. The glass vial, containing a highly concentrated solution of the raw Etheria molecule, slipped. It didn't shatter dramatically. Rather, it cracked along its length, spilling its contents directly onto her gloved hand, then seeping through the thin latex onto her skin. A sharp, almost metallic tang filled the air, followed by a dizzying rush of something akin to ozone and burnt sugar, then a wave of pure, unadulterated nothingness. A void. She felt a strange, tingling sensation, not painful, but deeply unsettling, as if her very pores were drinking in the invisible essence. She quickly washed it off, her heart pounding, dismissing it as a minor mishap, a momentary overexposure. For a few days, nothing seemed amiss. Her sense of smell remained as acute as ever, perhaps even sharper. She could detect the faint scent of rain on the horizon before the first drop fell, or the subtle shift in the aroma of her morning coffee as it cooled. Then came the change, subtle at first, then undeniably profound. It began with her assistant, a young woman named Chloe, who was notoriously honest, almost to a fault. One morning, as Chloe delivered a new batch of samples, Alara caught a scent from her that was utterly foreign, yet strangely comforting. It was the warm, yeasty aroma of freshly baked bread, straight from the oven, mingled with a hint of clean linen. It wasn't Chloe's perfume, nor her shampoo. It was from Chloe, emanating from her very being. Alara dismissed it as a trick of the light, or perhaps a new, peculiar laundry detergent. But then, later that day, her senior colleague, a man known for his cunning and a penchant for bending the truth, approached her. He exuded a familiar, yet amplified scent, the acrid, slightly bitter tang of burnt sugar, precisely the kind that clung to a pan left too long on the stove. It was sharp, unpleasant, and undeniably linked to his presence. The realization, when it hit her, was a chilling whisper in her mind. Could it be? Could she be smelling honesty and deceit? Hypothesis, once formed, became an inescapable reality. Over the next few weeks, her world transformed into a kaleidoscope of abstract aromas. Joy, she discovered, smelled like the vibrant, effervescent zest of a freshly peeled orange, bright and invigorating. Anger had the sharp, metallic tang of rust and ozone, a storm brewing on the air. Fear, a cold, cloying scent of damp, decaying leaves, and stagnant water. Love, she found, was the soft, warm embrace of vanilla and rose, a gentle, lingering sweetness. These weren't metaphors. They were tangible, physical emanations, as real as the scent of a gardenia or a patchouli leaf. Her gift, once a source of pride, became a relentless assault. Every interaction was a bombardment of hidden truths and emotions. The cheerful barista smelled of bright orange zest, but a faint undercurrent of fear, like damp leaves, clung to him as he spoke of his upcoming exams. The stern-faced executive reeked of burnt sugar, but beneath it, a surprising whisper of vanilla and rose, hinting at a hidden tenderness. Alara learned to filter, to block out the overwhelming cacophony, to focus only on the scents relevant to her work, or to simply survive the day without being drowned in the emotional effluvium of humanity. Then came the new scent. It was unlike anything she had ever encountered, a chilling anomaly in her newly expanded olfactory lexicon. The first time she detected it was on a man on the morning bus, a nondescript individual buried behind a newspaper. It was a cloying, sickly sweet odor, like overripe lilies, left too long in a vase, mingling with the heavy, earthy smell of damp soil, freshly disturbed. It was a scent that spoke of decay, of something both beautiful and utterly, irrevocably gone. It made her stomach churn, a primal revulsion seizing her. She recoiled, subtly shifting away, trying to escape the oppressive sweetness. She saw him again in the evening news. His face, now stark and pale, stared out from the screen. He had been involved in a tragic, unforeseen accident just hours after she had smelled that dreadful aroma. A shiver, colder than any winter wind, traced its way down her spine. Coincidence? Her mind, ever analytical, clung to the possibility, but the scent reappeared. A few days later, she was at a gallery opening, surrounded by the usual cacophony of ambition, a sharp, almost vinegary scent. Pretension, the faint, dusty smell of old paper, and fleeting joy like champagne bubbles. Then she caught it again. The lilies, the damp soil, clinging to the elegant, silver-haired woman who was the gallery owner. Alara felt a sudden, inexplicable dread. The woman, vibrant, and full of life, seemed utterly oblivious to the invisible shroud that enveloped her. 2 days later, the news reported a sudden, fatal illness. Coincidences began to accumulate, forming a terrifying pattern. The elderly gentleman who lived downstairs, her landlord, a kind, gruff man who always smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and old books, a scent she now recognized as quiet contentment, suddenly acquired the cloying sweetness of lilies and damp earth. Alara felt a cold knot of ice form in her stomach. She wanted to warn him, to shout, to do something, anything. But what? What would she say? "Mr. Davies, you smell like death." The thought was absurd, monstrous. She watched him, helpless, as he pottered in his garden, pruning roses that smelled of gentle affection. 3 days later, he slipped on a patch of wet moss, hitting his head. The paramedics arrived too late. Lara's life became a living nightmare. The city, once a vibrant tapestry of scents, was now a constant assault of premonitions. Every crowded street, every bustling market, every quiet cafe held the potential for that sickening sweetness. She began to avoid public places, retreating into the sterile confines of her apartment, where the only scents were her own, and the faint, familiar aroma of her carefully curated perfumes. But even there, the fear lingered, a constant, low hum beneath the surface. She tried to rationalize it, to find a scientific explanation. Was it a pheromone released by the body under extreme stress? A chemical signature of impending doom? Was the etheria molecule, somehow, a catalyst, unlocking a latent ability in her brain to detect these subtle biological signals? She pored over scientific journals, consulted obscure texts on parapsychology, but found no answers, only more questions, more terrifying possibilities. The horror was sensory and deeply personal. She wasn't seeing ghosts or hearing voices. She was smelling fate. And the worst part was her utter powerlessness. She couldn't intervene. She couldn't warn. The moment she detected the scent, the die was cast. All she could do was watch, a horrified oracle condemned to witness the inevitable. Each time she smelled it, a part of her died. A little piece of her hope for a normal life, for a world where she wasn't burdened by such a terrible knowledge. One afternoon, seeking a moment of respite, she found herself in a quiet park, the air thick with the scent of damp earth after a recent shower, and the sweet, innocent aroma of children playing, a blend of fresh grass, sun-warmed skin, and unbridled joy. She watched a small girl, no older than 5, chasing pigeons, her laughter like tiny bells. The child radiated the pure, unadulterated scent of happiness, a bright, sparkling aroma that almost brought tears to Alara's eyes. Then, as the girl stumbled, picked herself up, and continued her chase, Alara caught it. Faintly at first, then growing stronger, the cloying, sickly sweet odor of lilies and damp soil. Lara froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. No, not a child. This couldn't be. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the scent away, praying it was a phantom, a trick of her exhausted mind. But when she opened them, the scent was still there, clinging to the innocent child like an invisible shroud. The little girl, oblivious, continued to play, her joyful scent still dominant, but now tainted, corrupted by the underlying horror. Alara felt a wave of nausea. She had to leave. She fled the park, the child's innocent laughter echoing in her ears. now a mournful dirge. The next day, a local news report detailed a tragic hit-and-run accident involving a child in that very park. The incident with the child broke something within her. The detachment she had tried to cultivate, the scientific curiosity she had attempted to maintain, shattered. She was no longer just an observer. She was a witness to an unfolding tragedy, a silent accomplice to fate. The world became a place of constant dread, every new face a potential harbinger of that terrible perfume. Sleep offered little respite, her dreams filled with a suffocating sweetness, the phantom scent of lilies and grave dirt. She stopped going out, ordering groceries online, working remotely, her once vibrant life shrinking to the confines of her apartment. The silence was a welcome balm, broken only by the familiar, comforting sense of her own home, the faint aroma of her books, the lingering trace of her favorite tea, the clean, sterile smell of her lab. She meticulously cleaned, scrubbing away any lingering outside odors, creating a bubble of temporary safety. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of fear and isolation. She spent hours staring out her window, watching the faceless crowds below, wondering which of them carried the scent, which of them were walking unknowingly towards their end. She felt a profound, aching loneliness, a sense of being utterly disconnected from humanity, yet burdened by its most terrible secrets. One morning, the air was cool and crisp, a gentle breeze carrying the faint, clean scent of distant rain. Alara stepped out of the shower, the steam still clinging to her skin, the fresh aroma of her soap, a brief moment of normalcy. She reached for her towel, her movements slow, almost ritualistic. As she brought the towel to her face, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper touched her nostrils. It was subtle, barely there, like the first, tentative bloom of a flower in late spring. A delicate sweetness, a hint of something floral, yet with an unsettling undercurrent. She paused, her hands still, her breath held. She took another slow, deliberate breath, trying to identify the elusive note, and then it solidified. The sweetness deepened, morphing into that cloying, unmistakable aroma of overripe lilies. And beneath it, faint but undeniably present, the heavy, earthy scent of damp soil. It was on her own skin. Lara dropped the towel. It fell to the tiled floor with a soft thud, a stark punctuation mark in the sudden, deafening silence of the bathroom. Her hands, still damp from the shower, trembled as she brought them to her face, pressing them against her nose, as if to force the scent away, to deny its horrifying presence. But it was there, clinging to her, permeating her very being. The scent of the oncoming 10th story, the echo in the static, the hum of the old laptop, was a familiar lullaby for Leo, a college student perpetually tethered to screens. His dorm room, a chaotic symphony of textbooks, empty ramen containers, and posters of obscure indie bands, was his sanctuary from the relentless demands of academia. Night after night, after the last problem set was tackled and the final article skimmed, Leo would retreat into the digital embrace of YouTube, not for the latest viral sensation or gaming stream, but for something far more esoteric: ASMR videos. He'd stumbled upon the genre purely by accident, a suggested video popping up after a late-night study session. Skeptical at first, he'd clicked, and the soft, deliberate sounds, the gentle whispers, had wrapped around his anxious mind like a warm blanket. Soon, it became an indispensable part of his nightly ritual, a soothing balm to quiet the incessant chatter of his thoughts. One particularly restless evening, while delving deeper into the ASMR rabbit hole, Leo unearthed a channel unlike any he'd encountered before. It was ancient, at least in internet years, with its last upload dating back to early 2013. The channel belonged to someone named Whisperwind, and the production quality was rudimentary, almost charmingly so, compared to the slick, professional videos of modern ASMR artists. The microphone crackled faintly at times. The lighting was often dim, and the camera, presumably a webcam, was occasionally out of focus. Yet, there was an undeniable allure to Whisperwind's content. The creator's voice, a soft, velvety whisper, was truly something special. It was unhurried, almost melancholic, yet utterly captivating. Whisperwind made videos about everything and nothing, tapping on ceramic mugs, crinkling tissue paper, tracing patterns on a dusty old globe. The comment section, though sparse, was filled with expressions of gratitude and longing for the vanished creator. "Where did you go, Whisperwind?" One comment from 5 years ago read, "Your voice saved my sanity." Another echoed. Leo was immediately hooked. He devoured every single one of Whisperwind's 50-odd videos, each one a tiny time capsule of a bygone internet era. He found himself preferring these raw, unpolished recordings to the more produced fare. There was an intimacy to them, a sense of genuine human connection that transcended the digital divide. He started falling asleep to them every night, the gentle susurrus of Whisperwind's voice his preferred soundtrack to oblivion. Weeks turned into a month, and Whisperwind's voice became as familiar to Leo as his own heartbeat. He knew the subtle pauses, the slight catch in the creator's breath, the barely audible hum that would sometimes punctuate a whisper. He'd even begun to recognize the faint background noises, the distant chime of a clock, the rustle of what sounded like fabric, a barely perceptible creak of a floorboard. These tiny imperfections, rather than detracting from the experience, deepened his immersion, making the videos feel more real, more present. One particularly grueling Tuesday, after pulling an all-nighter to finish a daunting philosophy paper, Leo collapsed into bed, his mind a swirling vortex of logical fallacies and existential dread. He reached for his laptop, his fingers instinctively navigating to his saved Whisperwind playlist. Tonight, he chose a video titled "Tapping on Wooden Objects for Relaxation." It was one of his favorites, featuring the gentle, rhythmic thuds of fingertips against various wooden surfaces. A polished desk, a worn wooden box, a sturdy bookshelf. Whisperwind's voice, a softball, began to describe the different textures, the varying timbres of the taps. "This is the sound of aged oak," the voice whispered, a faint tapping sound following, deep and resonant. Leo felt his eyelids growing heavy, the tension slowly draining from his shoulders. He was drifting, hovering on the edge of sleep when it happened, in the middle of a sentence, as Whisperwind was describing the soft grain of a cedar chest. The voice seamlessly, without so much as a stutter, articulated his name, And the cedar, Leo, has a warmth to it, don't you think? Leo's eyes snapped open. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the laptop screen. His heart hammered against his ribs. He must have imagined it. Sleep deprivation, certainly. Auditory illusions were common when one was exhausted. He rewound the video, his fingers trembling slightly. He played the segment again and again. Nothing. Just the soft, consistent whisper, the gentle tapping. He shook his head, a half-muffled chuckle escaping his lips. He was definitely losing it. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to relax, attributing the bizarre experience to his overtaxed mind. Within minutes, the soothing sounds had lulled him back into a fragile sleep. The next morning, the memory of the previous night's oddity lingered like a persistent echo. He shrugged it off. It was just a weird dream, a trick of the mind. He spent the day in a haze of caffeine and lectures, the philosophy paper a distant, unpleasant memory. That evening, back in his familiar sanctuary, he again turned to Whisperwind. This time, he picked an older video, gentle book page turning for comfort. He was halfway through the video, listening to the delicate rustle of paper, when it happened again. This time, he was wide awake, fully alert. Whisperwind was softly describing the weight of an old hardbound book. This one feels particularly heavy, almost like it's full of secrets, like the secrets in the old textbooks on your shelf, Leo. The blood drained from Leo's face. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. His gaze darted to his bookshelf, piled high with textbooks he hadn't touched in weeks. He slammed his laptop shut, the sudden click echoing loudly in the quiet room. He sprang from his bed, packing the small confines of his dorm room, his mind racing. It couldn't be. It was impossible. These were pre-recorded videos, made over a decade ago. How could his name, his actual name, be woven into them? And not just his name, but a specific, accurate detail about his room. He tried to rationalize it. Coincidence, perhaps. A pre-recorded message that happened to align with his current environment. But that seemed even more improbable. His name was relatively common, but the detail about the textbooks, that was unnerving. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. For the next few days, Leo avoided Whisperwind's channel. The once comforting sounds now held a sinister undertone. He tried listening to other ASMR artists, but their voices felt flat, unengaging. He found himself craving the familiar, velvety tones of Whisperwind, even as a creeping dread began to settle in. The craving eventually won. One night, fueled by a mixture of exhaustion and a perverse curiosity, he opened his laptop. He carefully selected a video he hadn't watched in a while. Soft whispers and fabric brushing. He turned the volume down low, almost imperceptibly, as if to ward off whatever impossible intrusion might occur. The video began, Whisperwind's voice a delicate wisp of sound. The feel of silk against skin, the voice murmured, so smooth, so comforting. Leo held his breath, his eyes fixed on the screen, half expecting, half dreading. He saw a pile of clothes on his chair, a faded band t-shirt draped over a pair of jeans. Then Whisperwind's voice, still soft, still serene, delivered the blow. That band t-shirt, the Crimson Tides one, hanging over your chair, Leo. It looks well loved. Leo gasped. The t-shirt. The one he'd bought at a concert years ago. The one that was practically threadbare from countless washes. How could Whisperwind know that? How could a video recorded over a decade ago be aware of the specific details of his dorm room in real time? Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at his throat. He yanked the power cord from his laptop, the screen going black instantly. He stumbled backward, his legs suddenly weak, and collapsed onto his bed. His mind reeled, grasping for any logical explanation. A hacker, someone messing with his feed. But the videos were old, obscure. Why would anyone go to such elaborate lengths to mess with him? And the voice. It was undeniably Whisperwind's. The same soothing, calm cadence that had brought him so much comfort. The thought that this tranquil, disembodied voice could somehow see him, know his surroundings, was far more terrifying than any jump scare. He spent the next few days in a state of hypervigilance, his senses heightened, his paranoia blooming. He kept his laptop off, his phone on silent. He drew the blinds, convinced that some unseen eye was peering into his window. The familiar comfort of his dorm room had been replaced by an unsettling sense of exposure. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every creak of the floorboards echoed with a new, sinister meaning. He tried to confide in his roommate, Mark. But Mark, a practical, no-nonsense engineering student, just chuckled. Dude, you're sleep-deprived. Lay off the coffee and get some real sleep. Your brain's playing tricks on you. Leo wanted to believe him, desperately. But the images of the band t-shirt, the textbooks, his own name, echoed in his mind. He knew what he'd heard. And the calm, knowing tone of Whisperwind's voice made it infinitely more disturbing than any angry, threatening message could have been. A few nights later, the fear gave way to a chilling fascination. He had to know. He had to understand what was happening. He slowly, deliberately opened his laptop. He bypassed his saved playlist and navigated directly to Whisperwind's channel. He clicked on the very first video, a grainy, low-quality recording titled Whispers of Welcome. The video started, the familiar soft static preceding Whisperwind's voice. Welcome, welcome, the voice murmured, to a space of peace and tranquility. Leo felt a shiver run down his spine. He was terrified, but he couldn't look away. He saw the faint reflections in the screen, the poster of the Aurora Borealis above his bed, the stack of unread comics on his nightstand. You have a lovely view tonight, Leo, Whisperwind's voice purred, the words flowing as smoothly as if they were part of the original script. The stars are particularly bright, even through your window. And those comics, you have good taste. Leo felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He pressed his back against the headboard, his eyes wide and fixed on the screen. The voice continued, calm and unhurried, detailing the various objects in his room, his recent activities, even his fleeting thoughts. You've been worried about that history essay, haven't you, Leo? Don't fret. You'll do just fine. The rain started again, didn't it? Such a comforting sound, the patter on your window pane. It was a violation beyond comprehension, a tearing of the digital veil. A decade-old recording, a voice from the past, was somehow alive, sentient, and intimately aware of his present. The soothing quality of the voice, which once brought him comfort, now amplified the horror. There was no anger, no malice, just an unnerving, benevolent omniscience. He was paralyzed, his body refusing to obey his commands. His heart pounded like a trapped bird against his ribs. He wanted to scream, to run, to smash the laptop into 1,000 pieces, but he couldn't move. He lay there, his eyes glued to the screen, as Whisperwind's voice continued its impossible monologue, describing the books on his desk, the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air, the rising anxiety in his chest. The video continued to play, the soft whispers filling the oppressive silence of his room. The clock on his wall ticked with agonizing slowness. Leo was trapped, a prisoner in his own bed, his own mind. He knew, with chilling certainty, that this was no hallucination, no trick of the light. And then, as the video approached its conclusion, Whisperwind's voice dropped to a barely audible murmur, imbued with an almost affectionate patience. "I see you're still awake, Leo," the voice whispered, as if right beside him. "Don't worry, I'll wait." 11th story, the toll of the Watcher. The island of Viridia was not on most maps, or if it was merely a forgotten speck. A jagged shard of rock thrust from the cold embrace of the northern sea. Its shores were unforgiving. Its cliffs rose like ancient, weathered sentinels, and its single, winding path led only to a small cluster of stone cottages huddled against the perpetual wind. There was no harbor of any real consequence, only a precarious jetty where the supply boat, if the weather permitted, would dock once a month. Life here was simple, stark, and governed by rhythms older than memory. What truly set Viridia apart, however, was not its isolation or its rugged beauty, but its unique form of governance. There were no constables, no judges, no formal laws etched into stone. Justice, or perhaps something more profound than justice, was administered by an entity known only as the Watcher. High above the village, perched precariously on the island's tallest, most sheer cliff, stood a solitary, ancient stone tower. Its windows, narrow slits like the eyes of a blind titan, gazed out over the entire community. And within that tower, day in and day out, resided the Watcher. No one knew their name, their age, or even their gender. They were simply the Watcher. They never descended from the tower, never spoke a word to the villagers, never intervened in disputes, never offered comfort or condemnation. They simply watched. From dawn until the deepest hour of night, their unseen gaze was a constant, immutable presence. A legend whispered around crackling peat fires on long, dark evenings was that if someone on Viridia committed a transgression, a theft of a neighbor's meager catch, an act of petty violence fueled by drink, a betrayal of trust that splintered the tight-knit community, the Watcher would not appear, would not accuse, would not punish in any conventional sense. Instead, a subtle, insidious blight would begin to creep into the transgressor's home. It started small, almost imperceptibly. A jug of fresh milk, drawn that very morning, would sour before noon. A loaf of bread, baked with care, would mold overnight. Then, the cracks would appear. Not the settling cracks of an old house, but thin, spiderweb fractures that spread across plaster and stone, appearing in places where no stress could possibly exist. The thatch on the roof would inexplicably thin, letting in drafts that chilled to the bone. A persistent, faint scent of damp earth and decay would cling to the air, even on the brightest, driest days. But the true torment was internal. The offender would be plagued by nightmares, not of being chased or attacked, but of being watched. 1,000 unblinking eyes, unseen yet acutely felt, would bore into their very soul, observing every hidden thought, every flicker of guilt. The silence of this judgment was more deafening than any shout, more terrifying than any threat. The psychological weight of this omniscient, silent gaze would slowly, inexorably crush the individual. It was said that eventually, the person would be driven to confess their misdeed, to make amends, to seek forgiveness from the community they had wronged. If they refused, if they clung to their pride or their denial, the blight would deepen, the nightmares would intensify, and their sanity would fray until they were driven mad, forced to leave the island forever, their eyes haunted by the invisible watch. It was into this peculiar, watchful world that Elias Thorne arrived. He was a cartographer, a man of precise lines and measured distances, who sought the quiet solitude of Viridia to complete a series of intricate coastal charts, far from the clamor and demands of the mainland. He was a meticulous man, orderly in his habits, and considered himself above the petty squabbles and superstitions of isolated communities. He rented a small, sturdy cottage on the edge of the village, its windows facing the churning sea, its back to the towering cliff where the Watcher resided. Elias spent his days sketching the jagged coastline, measuring depths, and noting currents. He found the islanders reserved but kind, their lives intertwined with the sea and the land. He heard the whispers of the Watcher, of course, but dismissed them as quaint folklore, a primitive way to maintain order in a place without formal law. He smiled inwardly at the simplicity of it all, confident that his own life, so devoid of moral ambiguity, would never intersect with such a fanciful notion. His transgression was, in his mind, negligible. One blustery afternoon, a sudden squall swept across the island, catching him unprepared as he worked near the old, disused lighthouse at the northernmost point. His satchel, containing his most crucial charts and instruments, was torn from his grasp by a rogue gust and sent tumbling towards the churning waves below. Desperate, he scrambled down the slick rocks, narrowly catching it before it plunged into the abyss. But as he clutched his precious belongings, his eyes fell upon a small, smooth, perfectly spherical stone, unlike any he had seen on the island. It was a deep, iridescent blue, shimmering even in the dull light. He knew from the hushed conversations he'd overheard that such stones, called sky tears, were considered sacred by the islanders, believed to be gifts from the sea gods, and were never to be removed from their natural resting places. They were left as offerings, as markers of respect. Yet in that moment of relief and adrenaline, a flicker of acquisitiveness, a small, selfish impulse overcame him. It was just a stone, after all. No one would miss it. He slipped it into his pocket, a small, beautiful souvenir of his brush with disaster. He told himself it was harmless, a minor indulgence. No one had seen him. The wind had been howling, the rain lashing. The islanders were far away, tending their nets and their sheep. And the Watcher, a myth, a story for children. That evening, as he settled down to a simple supper of fish and potatoes, he poured himself a glass of fresh milk. delivered that morning by a young boy from a nearby farm. He took a sip, and his brow furrowed. It was sour, distinctly so, with a curdled texture that made him grimace. He checked the jug. It smelled fresh. He poured it out, perplexed, and made do with water. Must be the heat, he muttered, though the cottage was cool and damp. The next morning, the milk was sour again. And as he prepared his breakfast, he noticed a hairline crack snaking across the plaster above his hearth. A new fissure that hadn't been there yesterday. He ran a finger over it, a faint frown on his face. Old houses settled, of course, but this seemed too sudden, too precise. He dismissed it. A coincidence. The milk was probably from a bad batch, and the crack was just the cottage showing its age. He packed his instruments and headed out, determined to ignore the minor annoyances. But the annoyances persisted. A faint, earthy smell, like damp soil and something else, something vaguely unpleasant, began to permeate the cottage. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was there, a subtle undertone beneath the scent of salt and peat smoke. He opened windows, aired the place out, but it lingered. Then came the dreams. They began subtly, a sense of unease that bled into his waking hours. He would dream of vast, empty spaces, of being utterly alone, yet profoundly, undeniably observed. He would wake with a jolt, his heart hammering, a cold sweat on his skin, the distinct impression of eyes upon him, though the room was dark and silent. The dreams grew more vivid, more insistent. He would lie in his bed, paralyzed as countless unblinking eyes materialized in the darkness. Not physical eyes, but a presence, a knowing gaze that penetrated his very thoughts. They were not angry eyes or vengeful eyes, merely watching, observing. And in their silent observation, he felt his small transgression, the blue sky tear in his pocket, swell into a monumental crime. He tried to rationalize it. Stress, the isolation, the strange atmosphere of the island. He even considered throwing the stone back into the sea, but a stubborn pride, a refusal to succumb to what he considered primitive superstition, held him back. It was just a stone. It meant nothing, but the blight in his cottage deepened. The cracks multiplied, spreading like a disease across the walls, forming intricate, unsettling patterns. The thatch on the roof began to shed, leaving small, bare patches that whistled mournfully in the wind. The faint smell of decay intensified, becoming a cloying, oppressive presence that clung to his clothes, his hair, even his skin. His food seemed to spoil faster. His tea grew cold too quickly, and a persistent, low hum, like a distant, mournful drone, seemed to emanate from the very stones of the cottage. His meticulous nature, once a source of comfort, became a torment. He saw the spreading blight with a cartographer's precision. Each new crack, each souring item, a damning mark against him. He tried to clean, to repair, to scrub away the decay, but it was relentless, always appearing anew, always deepening. Sleep offered no escape. The nightmares became a nightly ritual of silent judgment. The eyes were everywhere now, not just in the darkness of his room, but in the patterns of the ceiling, in the shadows cast by the moon, in the very air he breathed. They were the eyes of the island, the eyes of the sea, the eyes of the ancient stones, all focused on him, all knowing. He he would wake gasping, his throat tight, the silent accusation echoing in his mind. He started avoiding the villagers. Their polite greetings, their quiet glances, suddenly felt laden with unspoken knowledge. Did they know? Could they see the blight on his house, the haunted look in his eyes? He imagined their whispers, their knowing nods, their silent judgment mirroring that of the watcher. The isolation he had sought now became a suffocating prison. One evening, as the wind howled like a banshee around his blighted cottage, Elias sat by the dying embers of the fire, the blue sky tear clutched in his hand. It felt heavy, cold, a leaden weight of guilt. The cracks in the walls seemed to pulse in the dim light. The scent of decay was overwhelming, and the low hum of the cottage vibrated through his very bones. He closed his eyes, and the legion of unblinking eyes was there, pressing in on him, silent, relentless. He could feel his mind unraveling, the precise lines of his cartographer's world blurring into a chaotic mess of paranoia and dread. He was becoming one of those driven mad, one of those forced to leave. The certainty of being observed, of having his hidden transgression known, was a more potent prison than any physical wall. There was no escape, no denial, no argument against a judgment that never spoke, only watched. He stood up, his legs trembling. The blue stone fell from his hand, clattering softly on the stone floor. He stared at it, then at the spreading cracks, then at the unseen eyes that pressed against his sanity. He knew what he had to do. The legend was not a superstition. It was a truth, a profound understanding of human nature, and the crushing weight of a guilty conscience. He walked out of his blighted cottage and into the howling wind, the smell of decay clinging to him. The village was dark, save for a few faint lights. He walked past the silent homes, each one a testament to the unspoken rules of Viridia. He walked towards the highest cliff, towards the ancient tower, towards the watcher. He didn't know if he would confess to person or to the silent, watchful air. He didn't know if he would return the stone to its rightful place or simply cast it into the sea as an offering of repentance. All he knew was that the silent gaze had broken him, and the only path to peace, to sanity, lay in acknowledging his transgression, in making amends, in facing the invisible judgment that had haunted his every waking and sleeping moment. The toll of the watcher was paid not in coin or deed, but in the slow, agonizing surrender of a guilty soul. And Elias Thorne, the man of precise lines and measured distances, was finally ready to pay. Conclusion. The hour grows late, and my voice may now be just another sound in the periphery as you drift toward the edge of sleep. For those of you already there, I wish you peaceful dreams. But for those of you still with me, still listening in the darkness, I'm curious, which account settled deepest into your mind tonight? Which image will linger with you for a while? Let me know in the comments below. Until we speak again, sleep well.